Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. We start the chapter 10, which is syllabus code 5090, and this is O-level biology. The name of the chapter is homeostasis, and you know as what homeostasis means. It's the maintenance of a constant internal environment. We're going to study the structure of the skin. Everything is about the skin. So how the structure is adapted for its function, and what is the function basically is to maintain a constant body temperature. And as you know, all human beings are maintained at 37 degrees Celsius. So in order to maintain a constant body temperature, we're going to study the structure and the functions of the skin. Whenever you start a chapter, you need to look at the syllabus, and you need to look at the key words of the syllabus. Now basically in homeostasis it says structure and function of the skin. So you have to know the structure and the function, then you have to define what do you mean by homeostasis, and then you have to understand the control and the concept of negative feedback, and I'll give you different examples to make you understand this concept. Then you have to identify on diagrams. Now whenever it says identify on a diagram, you must look at different diagrams and then check out the labels. So basically they're going to give you a diagram which is not labeled, and then they'll ask you to label it, and they'll just probably put A, B, C, D, L all around it and then ask you to label it. So diagrams of the skin, and you'd have to identify hair, sweat glands, temperature receptors, blood vessels, and the fatty tissue which is underneath the skin. And then the D part of the syllabus says describe the maintenance of a constant body temperature. Why is it that we as a human being will always be at 37 degrees Celsius, whether this room is hot or this room is cold, or you're in a cold place or you're in a hot place, but your body temperature is maintained at 37, and how the skin helps in doing that by all the processes which they've listed: sweating, shivering, and the fact that there's vasoconstriction and vasodilation, which is the blood vessels which are near the skin surface. So we'll be discussing all this, and you need to really be very clear in the concept so that you can answer all the questions on this chapter. Now as we look at the structure of the skin, as you know, a skin specialist is called a dermatologist. Now the word dermis or dermatology is the main ingredients of the structure of the skin. So the upper three layers, which is the first layer and the second layer and the third layer, this is called the epidermis. And please remember, epidermis has no blood vessels. So this is one part of the body where there are no blood vessels. It's very thin. And the first layer is called the Malpighian layer. Malpighian layer. Then the second layer is called the granular layer. And the third layer is called the cornified layer. The third layer is called the cornified layer. Well, the names are not so important. So Malpighian layer, granular layer, and the cornified layer. Now please remember what happens is in the Malpighian layer, mitosis is going to occur here, which is a type of cell division, and the cells are going to divide, and then they're going to move into the next layer, and then they're going to die, and then they move into the last layer, and from here they are going to slough off. And that is why you use scrub. You get a body scrub or a face scrub. Well, that is removed through dead cells at the top of the skin layer. So the cornified layer is made of dead cells, and that's of course very important because it protects you from invading pathogens. So the first layer, which I said Malpighian layer, is the one where mitosis occurs and where we have the pigment melanin, and melanin absorbs UV light. So the underlying structures do not get any effects of UV light, which is not very good, can result in mutations. So Malpighian layer divides by mitosis, cells divide by mitosis, pushed upwards, end up in the granular layer, and then finally they are dead and they end up in the cornified layer. And that is what we rub off. The scrub that we use actually helps us to remove this layer of dead cells, and that the scrubs that we use got some sort of a gritty stuff in it, some sandy stuff in it, which is going to sort of brush off or is going to remove, like you have a sandpaper to make something look fine. The wood has to be covered with, has to be rubbed with sandpaper. So similarly, the scrub actually helps to remove this layer of dead skin at the top, and we usually develop it at the, especially on our heels, not so much on our feet, but more so on the heels, that you develop these layer of dead skin. So epidermis, important thing is epidermis is the topmost part of the skin, which is exposed to all the bacteria and all the viruses, and so that is it's a dead area. It doesn't have any blood supply, and but it still gets, by diffusion, it gets from the blood vessels lying here, it does get glucose and oxygen, and the cells in the Malpighian layer are living, and they divide by mitosis and move on to the second layer and then to the third layer. Then a quick identification of everything. So here the first thing that you have to see is this coiled tube, and that's called the sweat gland, and this would be the sweat duct, and this would be the sweat pore. So the sweat which is produced here will enter the duct and then will go to the surface of the skin and will lie on the surface of the skin, and then this sweat will evaporate. So please remember, production of sweat does not cool your body down. It is actually the evaporation of sweat which cools you down. And I keep on saying this to you because when you write in the exams, you are not very clear how you're going to word this. Then we have another gland which is called the sebaceous gland, and this sebaceous gland produces a sebum. Sebum is an oily sort of a liquid, which of course, you must have noticed when you wash your hair the first day it looks very nice and dry, and then after a few days your hair looks oily. Well, it's because of the sebum being produced. And sebum is good. It's not bad for you, but I mean, we don't like it, but it's thing which keeps the skin moist and keeps the skin healthy because it contains some chemicals which kill bacteria. Then you have a hair follicle. This is the hair follicle which I have made, which is this one in the gray. And inside, of course, you have the hair, which is the normal hair you have on your head. And then we have to this follicle, please remember, this is the hair on the skin of your arms and legs. And because if you have a hair erector muscle attached to it, then it's got to be something on your arm. It couldn't be the hair on the head. And to this is attached a muscle, which is called a hair erector muscle. Now this has very little role to play in humans, but it has a lot of role to play in other animals, furry animals like polar bears. And then you have the third layer has got the fat cells, or which is called the adipose tissue, which insulates. Insulates means either prevents heat gain or prevents heat loss. We'll discuss it as we go along. So epidermis, dermis, and the adipose tissue. This is the three main layers. Then the epidermis is made up of three layers: Malpighian layer, granular layer, and conified layer, while the dermis contains a whole lot of structures: the hair follicle, the hair erector muscle, the sweat gland, part of the sweat duct, and of course it opens on the surface of the skin, and that opening is called the sweat pore. Now in this diagram I have not drawn some more details, so let me go on to the next page and draw a few more details. Now if you look at this detail that I'm drawing here, is you have receptors. Receptors for receiving. Receptor means something which receives. And I look at the arrows going away. So this could be a temperature receptor. This could be a temperature receptor. So you have temperature receptors, you have pain receptors, you have pressure receptors. So these temperature receptors will be called thermoreceptors. And as they're carrying it, but just like if you say, oh my God, this thing is very hot. Well, how did you know this thing was hot? You touch something and you say, oh, this pan is very hot, or this the iron with which you are ironing your clothes, and you say, oh my God, this is very hot. So how do you come to know it's hot or cold? And if somebody closes your eyes and puts some ice on your hand and you say, oh my God, that's something very cold you put on my hand. So what do you have in your skin? You have receptors for different sensations, like temperature receptors, pain receptors, pressure receptors. Now these, of course, the temperature receptors will be called thermoreceptors, and these neurons which are carrying impulses away will be called sensory neurons, right? Sensory, sensation. So a sensory neuron has to have a receptor at one end, because as we build up on the other chapter on coordination, you'll get to know more of this. So you have receptors in the skin, which we didn't draw in the previous diagram. Now besides these, you also have blood vessels. So you have blood vessels which are going upwards, and then they're going all the way. I'm just drawing it diagrammatically, and then they're going here. So blood vessels coming up here, arteries, and then the veins going and leaving the skin. And here you see this dotted line. And what I'm trying to show you in this dotted line is that this is a capillary network. So the capillary network arises from the arteries, starts off with the artery, then arteriole, then capillaries, then venule, and then vein. So these are called the skin arteries or the skin arterioles and the skin capillaries. So the skin capillaries occupy a very large surface area. They expose a very large surface area for either heat loss or for heat or preventing heat loss. Either it promotes heat loss or it prevents heat loss. Just like if you have tea in a thermos flask. If you have tea in a thermos, what are you preventing? You're keeping it hot. So you're preventing heat loss. So the tea remains hot in your thermos and you want to have it an hour later. But if you have ice cream in your thermos, what are you doing? You're keeping it in the thermos to prevent heat gain so that your ice cream remains cold. So understand the phenomena of insulation. Understand the phenomena of heat loss, preventing heat loss. This room is very cold. You don't want to become, your temperature should not go down to below 37. So you're preventing heat loss. Now you enter this room is very hot. You don't want to gain the heat of the environment. So please understand these two phenomena which we are going to understand is how the blood vessels are going to help us in these situations. If the room is too hot or if the room is too cold. Something is going to happen. The blood vessels are either going to vasoconstrict or they are going to vasodilate. Now let's go back to the first part of the syllabus, and it says define homeostasis. So what is homeostasis? Homeostasis is the maintenance of a constant internal environment. Now what is the internal environment dependent on? There are actually three factors. Number one, the temperature must be maintained. Why the temperature must be maintained? Because we have enzymes in our body which catalyze reactions. And the enzymes need an optimum temperature, and that optimum temperature in human beings is 37 degrees Celsius. So temperature needs to be maintained at all times at 37 degrees Celsius. Otherwise you're going to go into, if the temperature falls, then the enzymes will not be able to work. They'll go into slow motion. If the temperature rises, the enzymes will be probably denatured. As the temperature increases above the optimum, the rate decreases. So if you look at the temperature and the rate of enzyme graph, it's like this. So say this is 37. Now if your temperature goes to 39 or 40, so what is going to happen? You know what is going to happen. The rate is going to decrease. So if it's going to be 37 or 39, well, the rate is decreasing then. This was the rate at the optimum temperature. This is the rate. Say the rate is whatever the rate is. It's the best. It works best at that. So if the temperature is less than 37, then the rate decreases. If the temperature is more than 37, even then the rate decreases. So please understand, this is because the body is working on enzymes. The entire body system works on enzymes. So if the enzymes have to be working at their maximum efficiency, then the optimum temperature must be maintained. The optimum temperature must be maintained in all human beings. The second point is blood glucose level. Your blood glucose must be maintained between 80 to 120, and maximum if you have a meal it goes up to 200. And why is that so important? Please understand, glucose is like, it's the body fuel. Like for instance, you have to have some petrol in your car to drive the car. If you've got to go a short distance, you need little petrol. But if you need to go a long distance, you need to go from Lahore to Rawalpindi or Islamabad, well, you need a lot of fuel. Similarly, your blood glucose can never become 0 or can never become 1000. It must be maintained between these levels so that there is a constant, your cells can use it and you can effectively, your body can work. If you don't have any petrol in your car is not going to work. So what you have to understand is that the blood glucose is the body fuel. So that must be maintained. You must have, whether you've had a meal or you haven't had a meal, or you've been fasting for say 12 hours, even then your blood glucose is going to be maintained. So the blood glucose level needs to be maintained. The third and a very important factor is the water content of blood. Water content of blood. And if you remember in the last chapter, which is on excretion, if you have a lot of water, well, the kidney is going to remove the water, because the water, if you drink say 4 glasses of water on a cold day, when the volume of blood will increase, your blood will become, your plasma will become very dilute. We don't want that to happen. So the water content of blood must be maintained. If you have had too much of sugary stuff or too much of salty stuff, and you've had chicken kadai, well, all that protein, the amino acids and the sodium and the chloride is going to enter your blood. So you're going to feel thirsty and you're going to drink more water. But if it's a very cold day and you've had 4 glasses of water, well, of course, all that water enters your blood and your volume of blood increases and your blood becomes dilute. So all that must be passed out in the urine. So the kidney is going to remove the excess water. The kidney is going to remove the excess water and the excess salts. The excess water and the excess salts. So the kidney is going to remove that, but the skin cannot remove any of these stuff. But the skin helps in maintaining this. This is the most important thing, keeps the temperature constant. How does it keep it constant? Because if you enter a hot room, if this room is very hot, and this is the month of June, July, this room is going to be very hot. And then if the same room in December is going to be very cold. We live in Lahore, so we see the two extremes of temperature. So how the skin is going to help in maintaining the body temperature is what you need to understand. Now, what is negative feedback? Negative feedback is a very interesting phenomena. We see a lot of it in the human body. First of all, what we have to understand is that there is a normal level. Normal level for anything. Say it's normal level of your body temperature, 37. Normal level of blood glucose, 100, 120. So now there is a normal level of any parameter that we are talking of. Maybe we are talking of blood glucose, or maybe we are talking of body temperature. Now you enter this room is very hot, so your body temperature increases, right? Goes up, then it goes down. Something happens and it goes down. So you enter this room is very hot, maybe from 37 it goes up just by 0.5 or something, it doesn't even go up that much. Your blood also gets warmed up, it goes to the brain sends impulses to sweat glands, produce sweat, and all that happens. I'm just going to explain that. And then it's back to normal. So this was the normal level. There's an increase, and then back to normal. And then you go to another place and it's very, very cold there. So there's a decrease. Your body temperature decreases. And then it's back to normal again. And this is the typical graph that you get of negative feedback. And how do we define negative feedback? Negative feedback is there's a normal level, and then there's a change. The change can be an increase or a decrease. The change can be an increase or a decrease, and then back to normal. So All this is happening all the time. Your body temperature is maintained because of negative feedback. Your blood glucose is maintained because of negative feedback. Your blood glucose increases, insulin is released. Blood glucose returns to normal. You're on the treadmill exercising. Another hormone, glucagon, is released, returns the glucose level back to normal. So negative feedback. A normal level, a change, and back to normal. So this graph explains it. You can give this graph and give an explanation on it. And I'm sure you can get all the marks that are for this portion of the question. Now let's look at the first example, and that is of a room. You enter this room is very hot. It's very, very hot. It's in June or July in Lahore. Temperature receptors in the skin detect this. Information goes onto the sensory neurons which carry impulses. These are electrical impulses to the spinal cord, and the brain is informed. Now the brain sends impulses to the sweat glands. Now you see, brain sends impulses through motor neurons. So the motor neurons carry impulses to the sweat glands, and the sweat glands, it requires a lot of ATP energy to produce sweat. But the production of sweat doesn't cool you down. It is the evaporation of sweat that will cool you down. So this sweat will go to the surface of the skin, from where it will evaporate and cool you down. The next and the important phenomena is vasodilation. Vasodilation means the arteries, the skin arteries will, the muscles in the skin arteries will relax. So the lumen will become large. So more blood will flow in the arterioles and in the capillaries. So I said more blood in the skin artery, more in the skin capillaries. So more heat lost. So vasodilation. More blood flowing in the skin arteries, more in the skin capillaries. Naturally, if the arteries, you see the arteries at the beginning, then we have the arterioles, and then we have the capillaries. So more blood, if there is more blood coming from the arteries, then more in the arteriole and more in the capillaries, and capillary forms a network. The surface area of the skin is nearly 3 meters square. So it's a very large surface area, so more heat is going to be lost, and the person is going to remain at 37 degrees, even though the environment might be a little higher. So more heat lost. This is about the environment being hot in a place where the room is more than 37. Of course, then it becomes very difficult because your body is working to keep your temperature at 37. So you're sweating. Now the sweat must evaporate. So sometimes the humidity is so much in the air that no sweat evaporates. So then that's where the air conditioners come in, because they remove the humidity from the room. And that's why you feel cooler in a room in which the air conditioner is working. If you just have the fans on, the fans are not going to do much if the humidity is high. So please understand what is going to happen in vasodilation, or if you enter a room which is very hot. Now I will finish the video of this because I'm going to continue it in the next video, which has more details of the next part, which is the cold room and the other phenomena that I'm going to be talking about. Thank you.